Before we go over the recipe, make sure to stick until the end, as I'll be covering some of the most common issues people encounter the first time they make kimchi. Alright, so the main ingredient in this type of kimchi is Napa cabbage, which you might also find labeled as Chinese cabbage. This is followed by the supporting cast of daikon radish, carrots, scallions, ginger, pears, and garlic. Now, like every movie worth its salt, this cast needs a superstar to carry the whole lineup. And that role is filled in by Korean chili flakes called gochugaru, the only ingredient on here that can't be replaced by anything else, as it gives kimchi its distinct taste. And I really like these shiny speckles in it. Makes it look like the spice you would find on Dune's arachis. To start, cut the cabbage lengthwise in half, then cut each half again in two. Remove the stem at the bottom and then rough chop them into big pieces. Place all of them into a big bowl and sprinkle in 70 grams of salt. Make sure to use pickling salt that doesn't contain iodine or anti-caking agents, which will result in a darker color for the brine and vegetables. Mine is sourced from a national salt mine and is pure unprocessed salt. Make sure that all the pieces of cabbage are salted well. Now add cold water, just enough to cover the cabbage, and let it sit for at least 2 hours in this brine. In this time, you can get started on prepping of the other ingredients. Starting with a bundle of scallions. Mine had 8 sprigs as they were a bit thinner. Remove the root ends and then cut them into matchstick-sized segments or about 5 cm long. Then take 2 medium-sized carrots or about 400 grams and julienne them, which will yield similarly long segments as the scallions. Next, take half of a large daikon radish, peel off its exterior and then cut it into large batons, as long as the carrots but about double in girth. Something similar to French fries. That's because the radish has less fiber than the carrot and we don't want it to turn into mush once pickled. Now we'll prepare the kimchi pickling paste. Start with a 40 grams segment of ginger. Remove the skin, and maybe with something more efficient than a knife. Then cut it into smaller pieces. Next up, we need the sugar that will feed the bacteria and promote fermentation. To do that, I used a total of 250 grams of pears. Peeling off the skin isn't really necessary, but it does make a smoother paste, so I like doing it. Some like to add rice paste, but that's a bit too much of a hassle since pears work just as well. But make sure that you use the sweeter variety, not those crunchy apple-like ones. Then remove the stems and take out the core. Place them all in a blender along with 6 cloves of garlic and 4 tablespoons of fish sauce. Now this guy doesn't smell too great, but don't worry, it's crucial for the fermentation and you won't taste it in the final product. Now blend it all into a smooth paste, as smooth as you can get it. To that we'll add 80 grams of gochugaru. This is enough to make kimchi with a medium level of heat, and since the spiciness of gochugaru can vary from brand to brand, you might find out that you prefer to add more or less. Keep this in mind for a second batch of kimchi. Once mixed, this is how the paste should look. Now allow the gochugaru a bit of time to bloom after you mix it in, which works perfectly, as now with all the ingredients prepped, it's time to put it all together. So take the cabbage, drain all the water, all the salt that it needs has already been absorbed, so give it a thorough wash. We're just washing away the excess salt. Now drain it and add to it all the other vegetables. Then give them a good mix so that there's an even distribution. Now add all the gochugaru paste and mix them all together using your hands. But, fair warning, due to the gochugaru, the paste might sting a bit and it can also stain your hands, so I do recommend using gloves. I didn't have any when I filmed this, and while it wasn't too bad, I now have gloves to make my life easier. Now this batch should make about 3 liters or 100 fluid ounces of kimchi. You can split it into several smaller jars or one big one. The key thing to keep in mind is that once the fermentation is done, you'd want to store the kimchi in the fridge, so make sure to use jars that actually fit your fridge. Try to leave as little air as possible inside by using a long wooden spoon or the tail end of a spatula to pack it in. Once filled, loosely add the cap on top. Don't tighten it, as there will be a buildup of gas. And I'm sure you don't want a mix of kimchi and glass splattered all over your kitchen. Place a deep plate underneath each jar just in case there is an overspill. And let the kimchi to ferment on the counter for 4 to 7 days. On day 4, give it a taste, and if you feel that it needs a bit more sourness, then let it go for the remaining 3 days, but this will depend a lot on the temperature in your home. During winter, it might take a few more days to reach peak fermentation. After that, you can place the cap on tightly and transfer it in the fridge, where it will last for months as it slowly develops more flavor. Now let's go over a few problems you might encounter while or after fermenting your kimchi and how to fix them. Number 1. The top of my kimchi has turned grey or brown. As the fermentation process kicks in, there are a lot of interesting things happening in the jar. One is that water gets drowned out of the vegetables, and the second is the buildup of gas. The liquid created when it's at the top of the jar acts as a barrier for unwanted bacteria, as there are no vegetables exposed to air. But because of the buildup of gas, the liquid might get stuck at the bottom of the jar with no way traveling to the top. So keep an eye on the kimchi during the fermentation period and use the handle of a spatula to create a path for the liquid to flow to the top. But if you already have a layer of brown oxidized kimchi on top, all you have to do is to scoop it out and discard it. If the layers below have a normal saturated red color, then it's fine as long as you make sure to keep it submerged in liquid. Also, do not just add plain water to make enough liquid to cover the top. This will dilute the pickling paste, which can mess up the fermentation. Number 2. My kimchi is too salty. The reason that this can happen is because too much salt was added or the cabbage wasn't rinsed well enough. It also depends on when you are tasting it, because as kimchi ferments, the saltiness goes down. So first thing you can do is just to let it ferment for a few more days. But if you feel that it has already fermented enough, then the best way to fix it is by adding more radishes, as they are great at absorbing salt. Or you can just scrap it and make a new batch. Number 3. The cabbage in my kimchi has black spots on it. First thing, try to scrape it off. If it doesn't work and it looks like they are part of the cabbage fiber, then you've got nothing to worry about. These are a cosmetic defect of the Napa cabbage called pepper spots. You might not have noticed them when you bought the cabbage, but it's perfectly safe to eat and they won't affect the taste. Number 4. I made too much kimchi. What am I supposed to do with it now? Well, you could either gift it to your friends or hoard it in the fridge as it builds more flavor. Then make sure you're subscribed to my channel, as I will be releasing soon a video on creative ways that you can cook with kimchi.